Hello and welcome, retailers and manufacturers, to day 3 of TP Ignite's online educational series. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Ben Stimson, Senior Director for TMG Media, and we have a great session for you today titled, Are the Feds Shutting Down Tobacco Alternatives? Today's session will be presented by the one and only Tony Abboud. Tony is a regulatory consultant, a government affairs expert, an attorney whose firm, Strategic Government Solutions, represents companies in the tobacco and vapor space. Tony also serves as the executive director of the Vapor Technology Association, VTA, a US-based trade association representing the vapor industry. Now, Tony has represented companies on legal and regulatory issues for more than 25 years and has advised and consulted companies in the tobacco and vapor industries for over a decade. Among many other things, as executive director of the VTA, Tony crafted the successful, multifaceted strategic campaign to stop President Trump's only full flavor ban from being enacted in 2020. In his work as a state lobbyist, Abboud has developed and implemented successful strategies for companies facing simultaneous multi-state legislative challenges in the vapor industry. Abboud is recognized as a leading voice for essential regulations and balanced discussions for vapor products. Joining us now live is Tony Abboud. Tony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Ben. Thank you for having me again on this great program.
No problem. You joined us last year, which was a great session last year. Now, it was only in May, so 6 months ago. The vapor industry has changed so much in the past 6 months. Would you agree?
It is remarkable, especially when we look at exactly where we were one year when we did this conference last year. Yeah. The things that have happened since then have been dramatic, many of them unanticipated. And so I'm looking forward to talking about some of those things today.
Well, we're looking forward to your presentation. We've got a 45-minute session and a question and answer. So anybody who's tuned in right now and watching, please be sure to post your comments in the comment section, and we'll ask Tony these questions when he's finished. Tony, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to yourself, and we look forward to your presentation. We'll speak soon.
Thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate it very much. So like I said, I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group again today. I appreciate the work that Ben and Antoine and the group do at TPE to put this educational forum together, because I think it elicits significant issues that have to be addressed and that are being addressed in this industry. And these are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about regularly. So today I've been asked to talk about this question of, are the Feds shutting down tobacco alternatives? And I want to look at that from a couple different perspectives. The first is I want to look at the economic impact of the vapor industry and how we see that industry today compared to, for example, 3 years ago. The second thing I want to do is talk about FDA's abrupt change on flavors. That's one of the big positional differences from when we met last May to right now. And then finally, I want to talk about congressional activity and some emerging trends in the marketplace involving tobacco and vapor taxes, as well as synthetic nicotine. So let's start with this question of, what does the vapor industry look like? In 2018, the VTA commissioned a study by economist John Dunham and Associates. And we asked him to take a full review of the entire vapor products industry. And it was a difficult task because most data on the industry comes through sources like Nielsen. And Nielsen tracks only certain segments of the industry, but primarily convenience and retail sectors such as gas stations and the like. And as a result, it tends to track only a segment of the products in the industry that are sold through those channels. So his original report, and we have asked him to update for 2021. So I want to talk about what we have found. So today in 2021, he found that there are just over 10,000 vapor companies in the United States. And you can see the breakdown that they have in terms of vape shops, which comprise about 81% of the overall number of companies. and then blending vape shops, which are vape shops that also manufacture their own e-liquids. E-liquid manufacturers, there's over 200, and so on and so forth down the list. Now, this is important in real terms today, but also important in comparison to where we were. And this is what we have found. From 2018 until today, from the first time he did his report, there's been a decline from about 11,500 vape shops down to 8,300. And the same is true, but a slightly lower reduction in the number of blending vape shops and e-liquid manufacturers. Overall, in 2018, we found that there were almost 14,000 different vapor companies in the United States doing business. And today that number, as I indicated, is just over 10,000. Now, that decline in business and companies is seen most aggressively in the vape shop sector. When you look at the vape shops, both retail and also manufacturing vape shops combined, you see a dramatic decline from just over 13,400 to just under 10,000. Because of this decline in the number of employers, we've obviously seen a reduction in the number of jobs. And while the industry itself threw off a total of 166,000 jobs in 2018, that number has now decreased to approximately 133,000 jobs. Of course, with those jobs goes wages. And the decline in wages has been from about $7.9 billion, which is significant, to still over $7 billion. So what this tells us is that the industry, though it is contracting and consolidating, is still paying its workers significant money in terms of wages and benefits. So at the end of his full analysis, what Dunham has concluded is that the output of this industry is still exceeds $22 billion. And we can look at that in those large numbers on this slide. The total economic impact of the industry today is over $22 billion. When factoring in the jobs that are created, the taxes that are generated, the attendant or side industries that are supported directly by the vapor industry, those would be the indirect jobs as well as the other jobs that are thrown off. Now, the industry itself generates, according to Dunham, $4.7 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. And as I noted earlier, the 133,000 jobs throw off over $7 billion in wages and benefits. So the net result of his outcome of his report is that while the industry has contracted and we have seen declines, it is still very strong and stronger than other industries in this country. So let's now, understanding kind of where we are from a business standpoint, talk about where we are from a regulatory standpoint. FDA and the future of flavors. Now, to do this, we need to rewind a little bit. If a quick review on this federal fight to save flavors. It was in November of 2019, after a massive campaign to convince the Trump administration not to ban flavors, that the industry actually convinced the administration to do just that. Don't ban all flavors and raise the age to vape to 21. It was a few months later that the FDA announced that it would be banning all flavors for cartridge and pod-based e-cigarette products. Now, what we saw as a result of that was, starting in March and thereafter, a slow but steady rise in flavored disposables. And many of those products then came to the fore and have then begun to challenge the regulatory environment, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, in September of 2020, the FDA application deadline for PMTAs arrived, and the FDA started to review all of those PMTAs, including millions of applications for flavored products. Now, that's all in 2020 what took place, and things got quiet for a while. And then the next thing we heard from the FDA, which was the first thing we heard from the Biden administration, which was one of the subjects I discussed at our meeting last May, was that they were going to act to prevent and save lives and prevent future generations of smokers. This big announcement, which came on the 100th day of the Biden presidency, was designed to do two things: to issue a rule to ban menthol as a characterizing flavor in cigarettes, and to issue a rule to ban all characterizing flavors, including menthol, in cigars. Now, we talked about this at the last TPE, and the significance I advised everyone was the following: that FDA was refocusing on combustible products, that it was returning to its fundamental aspect of its health mission, which was ending smoking. As the FDA put it, they were taking urgent action to reduce tobacco addiction and to curb deaths by eliminating menthol cigarettes and by eliminating flavored cigars. And this was a good change from what had been a myopic focus on ENDS products, particularly flavored ENDS products, and youth. And so I concluded back then that this suggested that FDA was moving on from a category-wide ENDS flavor ban, and that FDA was clearly committed to the PMTA process. And as FDA noted in that announcement, they intended to make the proposed rules on menthol and flavored cigars one of the agency's highest priorities. So what happened? Because we ended up in a very different place. Well, before we get to that, let's talk about what happened next on June 11th, just about a month, less than a month later. FDA held a meeting to tell everybody where it was with respect to the PMTA process. And the graphic there shows the actual process that FDA says it was going to follow. But FDA noted a number of important things at the meeting. The first was that it created a special queue for the large manufacturers like Juul and the tobacco companies. And then it also said that it had randomized the review of all of the smaller manufacturer PMTA applications. Now, many of these is where we found the 6 million flavored ENDS product applications. Now, the FDA was candid and said, look, we're not going to be able to finish our review of PMTAs by September 9, 2021, which was a date that was included in a court order, but not necessarily a deadline for FDA. And FDA did not treat it as a deadline, but they did commit on June 11th to announcing their decisions on the larger manufacturer PMTAs by that date. They also said that they would continue the review of the smaller manufacturing PMTAs after that date. And of note, what will be of note later is a question and answer that they received at this very meeting. One of the questions was, what if a PMTA does not have long-term health data included in the application? And the answer was that product-specific long-term studies were not required, which was consistent with everything FDA had said up to that point. So FDA was on track. It appears as if there was clear sailing ahead. They had a plan. They had articulated that plan. They were executing that plan. But this is where FDA is today as it relates to flavored products and PMTAs. FDA has not announced any decisions with respect to the larger manufacturer PMTAs, and they did not do that by September 9th as they had promised. There was one notable exception, which was a Reynolds product, but that is a product that hasn't even been sold on the market. Otherwise, FDA has not made any decisions on any of the existing products that are on the market for those large manufacturers. At the same time, FDA did not continue to review smaller manufacturer PMTAs after September 9th, as it had said it would. Instead, they ended up issuing market denial orders to almost 1,000 companies covering over 6 million flavored ENDS products. And they did this in rapid form. Now, and at this point, as we sit here today, I think it's conventional wisdom that we are unlikely to see FDA take any further action in the foreseeable future on these outstanding PMTAs. So how did we get here? Well, if you remember, it was June 11th that FDA laid out its plan, but it was only a couple weeks later that the acting commissioner was called to testify before Congress. At that hearing, members of the committee told Acting Commissioner Janet Woodcock that she had to deny Juul's PMTAs outright, that she had to deny all flavored e-cigarette PMTAs. she had to do something about disposables, that there was an ongoing epidemic amongst youth, even though the numbers, according to the National Youth Tobacco Survey, continue to decline year over year, demonstrating that there is no ongoing epidemic. Now, at the hearing, the acting commissioner did very little to defend the PMTA process that her agency had so arduously worked out and was implementing. She did little to defend FDA's dedicated employees, and she did little to defend the rule of science in FDA's decision-making process. All in all, it was a terrible hearing for the acting commissioner. Now, one reason could be because it got personal. Before she sat down to testify, the acting commissioner was confronted with a very slickly produced video. In the video were personal pleas from a parent who says that her child died from vaping, as well as from a teen who says that the commissioner's lack of action, that the FDA's extension of the PMTA deadline is what has addicted all these kids like her and her generation. And the video ended with this direct personal plea to the commissioner. And then she had to answer questions that were not very comfortable for her to answer. So, yeah, it got personal. And from everything I've learned, the acting commissioner got directly involved. So much so that by July 9 of last year, the FDA penned what is now known as the Fatal Flaw Memo, which changed the flavored PMTA review process altogether. What they did is they created this fatal flaw analysis, saying that if your flavored application does not have long-term studies that can prove your flavored product will help people quit smoking, FDA will deny your application outright without reviewing it. And the FDA said also, if you don't have studies that prove your flavored products will help people quit smoking more than your tobacco and menthol products, they will do the same. They will deny your application outright. Here's the problem. This was never a requirement before. And it was too late now, a year after the application deadline had passed, for any such studies to be submitted. And FDA had said as recently as June in the meeting that I just described that these studies were not required. So FDA decided to implement a retroactive prerequisite to the application process and do it in a way that ended up eliminating most of the flavored ends PMTAs from the marketplace. So again, it was June 23 that she testified, and then in the ensuing weeks got directly involved. How do we know that she was involved? Well, because when the FDA drafted and published its fatal flaw memo, they made a point of writing it down. It says, to date, the Office of Science has implemented its plan to review these applications, but they have been tasked with developing a new plan to effectively manage the remaining flavored ends PMTAs, and that task has been assigned by the acting commissioner. Now, if you understand government and what government memos are like, there is a reason that the Office of Science wanted us to know that this was being forced upon them from above. And in all likelihood, it is because it is directly contradicted by the plan that FDA Office of Science and FDA leadership at the Center for Tobacco Products had originally laid out and was enforcing. So in other words, this is a political decision, and it happened in remarkable time. June 11th was the meeting where they announced their plan. Less than 2 weeks later, the commissioner testifies, and less than 2 weeks after that, they had been forced to write the memo saying, we're changing everything up. And then it didn't take long after that for the FDA to start issuing market denial orders for virtually all flavored ends PMTAs. It was August 26th that they removed 4.5 million products from the market, most of them from one company, by refusing to file those PMTA applications. But as it relates to this new fatal flaw PMTA process, here's what FDA did. On September 3, they announced market denial orders for 31 companies covering 300,000 products. On September 14, they did the same thing for 134 companies covering 637 products. And on September 17, they did the same thing for another 127 companies' applications covering over 100,000 products. Now, if you think through this, it is remarkable to see the change in focus from FDA. It was October 12, as I noted, that the Vuse Solo product was approved, but in that same announcement, the FDA denied 10 flavored PMTAs from Reynolds in their application. And of course, the Vuse Solo product is not a product that is being actively sold on the market. So what has FDA done? FDA has essentially removed almost all flavored ends products from the market. And they did so in dramatic fashion, implementing a test or a standard and a requirement that had not been a requirement before, and completely taking the ball off of the goal here, which is combustible products and helping to eliminate combustible products. Now, at the same time, they haven't acted on the applications that were filed by Juul and the big tobacco companies. And what's striking about that is that FDA had promised to make those decisions by September 9, because in their own words, whether they denied Juul's or tobacco's applications or granted them, it would have the greatest impact on public health, because those products are ubiquitous in the market, according to the FDA. So why is the FDA not taking action on those PMTAs, but instead decided to remove all of the smaller companies' products from the market using this process, which is so legally suspect? It's a difficult question to answer. Some of those questions may be determined through litigation, because as a result of FDA's dramatic action, legal action has ensued. Companies had no choice. They had to appeal the denial of their applications, but they have to do it one at a time, which is a problem for the industry at large. And in some of those cases, the denial orders were rescinded by the FDA. In some cases, almost immediately. Turning Point filed their motion with the appellate court, and in very short order, the FDA said, you know what, we're going to rescind our denial order to your company, and we're going to accept your products back in to review. Now, what's amazing is that in their public statement, the FDA said that they didn't realize that Turning Point had submitted data or had submitted science. This is very hard to believe, because obviously FDA had been sitting on these applications for quite some time. But it doesn't detract merely because they have accepted some products back into the review process. It doesn't detract from the broad illegality of the actions that they took. Now, some of the denial orders, the FDA said, no, we're going to stand up by our denial orders. And some of the courts have been, those applications have gone to court. And in at least one case in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals called what the FDA did a surprise switcheroo. And we're awaiting a ruling shortly to hear whether or not that court, which has now granted a stay, in other words, the FDA cannot enforce that denial order against the company that had filed there, which is Triton. And now we're looking and should be receiving shortly, or the court should be issuing shortly in the next, hopefully 30 to 60 days, a ruling as to its position on the overall claim. Now, some of the biggest challenges in the tobacco industry, and in particular in the vapor industry, have all come through litigation. So it's not surprising that we are here today because of the vagaries of FDA regulation and the difficulties and the complexities of it. So once again, the courts will decide whether FDA broke the law, and then the ultimate question is going to be, how will that be applied more broadly? In other words, how will the FDA adjust its behavior going forward? So let's talk about some recent congressional activity. And one of the most interesting places of activity was on tax, which is what I suggested to you last May was going to happen, that the Biden administration, in pushing for its infrastructure bill, was going to look to tax vape and tobacco products. And it sure did. This fall, as part of the Biden administration's reconciliation bill, or the Build Back Better Act, as it is known, there was a tax that was proposed of $1 per pack of cigarettes increase. So that would raise the tax on a pack of cigarettes to just over $2. And also a 5.6 cents per milligram tax on vapor products. Now, this caused, obviously, the industry significant concern because in addition to the cigarette tax, taxes on virtually every other form of tobacco product were also increased. Now, in a second proposal, or an amended proposal with the House Manager's amendment, the cigarette tax and virtually all other tobacco tax increases were stripped out of the bill. But the vapor tax alone was kept in the bill at 2.78 cents per milligram. Now, the whole point of the bill was supposedly to create parity. There's a belief amongst regulators in Congress and at the state level that all tobacco products are equal and cause equal amounts of harm, and therefore all of those products should be taxed at an equivalent level. Well, there's a big problem with the proposal that was done by the government, which is that there was no parity in the tax provisions that they had proposed. So our message to the Hill was very, very clear. We had four main components of it. First was that this proposal was going to make cigarettes cheaper because consumers would be faced with a new tax adding 73% to the retail price of a bottle of e-liquid, while the cigarette tax would remain unchanged. That science has shown that when you increase vaping taxes, that leads to more cigarette smoking. And in this case, our economist, John Dunham and Associates, determined that the proposed tax on vaping would be 9 times higher than a pack of cigarettes. Of course, this also would violate the president's pledge. And what was very important was the article that was written in the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, which was an anti-tobacco research organization. 15 past presidents penned a letter which made it clear that the policies and particularly the tax on vaping products at a rate that was equal to or near tobacco taxes was the wrong policy and the wrong way to go for social justice purposes. As I noted, we also had our economist who had completed the economic impact analysis run the numbers on this particular tax. And what we found was that a closed system pack of 2 pods would be there would be a tax of just over $2 imposed on that 2-pack. But on a 60 milliliter bottle of e-liquid, the tax would be approximately $10. Now, this is a dramatic difference. Per unit, you can see that the tax on an open system product would be almost 900% higher than the tax on a pack of cigarettes. And the tax on a 2-pack of pods would be 120% higher. Now, this is why we were able to clearly demonstrate to members of Congress that there is no parity, that whatever you think you're doing with your bill, this is not going to create parity. It's going to create a disincentive for people to quit smoking and an incentive for them to go back to smoking. Frankly, if taking their numbers and applying them to a pack of cigarettes, that what our economists found is that instead of a tax of $1.01, the tax on a pack of cigarettes using the equivalent of the per milligram tax should be $5.71. Nothing in this bill added up. And we made sure that members of Congress knew that. We also shared with them the economic impact, the negative economic impact of lost jobs and wages that would result from this tax. A total of over 42,000 jobs would be lost as a result of if this new tax would go into place. Not to mention $620 million in state and local taxes, $2.2 billion in wages. At a time when workers are looking for work and struggling, this is the wrong time, we made clear, to impose any sort of new tax on the vapor industry. Now, let's talk about some of the challenges ahead. Last year, we talked about disposables. And what I explained then was that the FDA had announced its ban on flavored cartridge and pod-based products in January of 2020, and then implemented it in February of 2020. And the FDA's rationale at that time was that pod and cartridge-based products were small, they were easy to conceal, they were easy to use, they were intuitive, they were convenient, ready to use immediately after purchase. They come in many flavors. And that was a large part of their rationale for banning closed system, particularly cartridge and pod products flavors. Now, disposable products, I told you then, all shared all of these same traits, but they were expressly exempted from FDA's ban. Think about that. They were expressly exempted. Now, effectively what FDA did was they held a "come on in, we're open" sign to disposable products, because they made it clear we're getting rid of only flavors in cartridge and pod products, but not in disposables. No one has ever been able to articulate a sound rationale for that. So as a result, we've seen a rise in flavored disposables as those flavored pods were removed from the market. We've seen some heightened press and negative pressure from interest groups talking about disposables. Now, but the reality is that FDA has numerous options for addressing disposables, but to date, it has done nothing. Now, the question ultimately is, will FDA act to address disposables? Given the recent flux in leadership at the FDA, we have a new commissioner that is being nominated. The director for the Center of Tobacco Products, Mitch Zeller, has announced his retirement effective in April. It's unlikely FDA takes dramatic action on anything in the short term. Now, we also talked about some regulatory issues with respect to synthetic nicotine. And it was last year, it is clear that the increase in synthetic nicotine, which frankly has, I think, become even more accelerated because of what FDA has done with respect to flavored vaping products. In other words, FDA ripped all the flavored vaping products out of the market in the course of a couple weeks' time without reviewing any of the science that was submitted with those applications, and told these companies, nope, you're done selling the product which is the predominant part of your business. So FDA has effectively created, much like hanging that "we're open" sign for disposables, it has effectively created the impetus for companies to shift, to move, and to look at different options for how to remain in business and continue to serve their clientele who have been relying upon vaping products, particularly those who've been relying upon vaping products to stay away from smoking cigarettes. Now, there's no question that there's more regulatory concern still at the FDA, but there is serious questions about what, if anything, the FDA can and or will do. Yes, they're examining their enforcement options, but they've been examining them now for, about a year, if not more. And still, we haven't seen anything. Now, just as a quick review so people fully appreciate what we're talking about, the nicotine, there are two types of nicotine that are currently available on the market. Most nicotine on the market is tobacco derived. In other words, it comes from the tobacco plant. that is essentially ubiquitous. There's also some highly purified tobacco-derived nicotine. But all of the tobacco-derived nicotine is what's typically considered S-nicotine. Naturally occurring nicotine has S-nicotine as one of the enantiomers and a very small percentage of R. Now, non-tobacco-derived nicotine, which is also known as synthetic nicotine, comes in is not derived from a plant, but is created in a laboratory. It is essentially synthesized in the laboratory. And there are two primary forms of that on the market today. One is a primary form of S-nicotine, and then an RS-nicotine or a racemic mixture of nicotine. Now, there are a number of commercial issues that are still as present today as they were last year, which is that there's a lot of discussion in the marketplace about what synthetic nicotine products are, and there's not a good understanding as to what they are not. So what we have seen is that the real promise of them is that they offer a truly tobacco-free alternative. In other words, a complete break from tobacco in all of its forms. And that is one reason why it is important for FDA and regulators to realize and understand that as products and companies innovate, we need to be looking at innovations that make for safer and better products for consumers. And if you can create a nicotine that is devoid of all tobacco alkaloids or tobacco residuals, you are moving the game forward in a way that is significant, and it needs to be addressed in that context. So synthetic nicotine products we've seen in various vapor products, in nicotine pouch products, some heat not burn products, and clearly there is a growing market for it. But there are some significant regulatory concerns that we need to address, and that need to be addressed in order to avoid having some of the similar problems that we saw in the early days of the vapor products industry. Now, consumers and companies need to be aware and to beware. First of all, many of the products that have been coming into this market are claiming to be using synthetic nicotine, but are not. There are numerous reasons why this is the case. We have learned and heard about many false certificates of analysis that are circulated. There are certificates of analysis that claim to be using a product. There are companies that have traditionally used tobacco-derived nicotine, but use some synthetic nicotine and are using those certificates of analysis to suggest that's in all of their products. But there's also a language issue that we have to get past, which is this notion that you have to be thinking through and listening carefully to what companies are saying. So, for example, you have a situation where some companies may be claiming that just because nicotine is available in other nightshade plants, such as tomato and eggplant, that they're saying, oh, well, our nicotine is not from tobacco, but it's coming from eggplant, or it's coming from tomatoes. Well, the practical reality is that that's just not a realistic possibility. Scientifically, it is virtually impossible. And let me put it this way: there's been no system by which or process by which one has been able to make nicotine from tomatoes or eggplants commercially available because the amounts that exist in nature and the biomass that's required to achieve any sort of commercially producible form. So the result is that we need to be aware and not speak about things that we don't understand, but we also need to ask a lot of questions as consumers and buyers of the product. So you need to be asking companies about where their nicotine is made, how it is made. You need to be asking for not certificates of analysis, but it needs to be available for each batch. And you need to understand what is actually going into these products. And in some cases, depending upon your size, you may want to consider testing the product yourself. And there are tests that can be done that can easily identify whether or not your product is synthetic. Now, We've seen some of the concerns about synthetic nicotine also play out with the introduction in December of the Clarifying Authority over Nicotine Act of 2021. This was a bill that was filed in the House by Representative Mickey Sherrill. She is a Democrat in New Jersey, and the goal is very simple: to add the words containing nicotine from any source to the Tobacco Control Act. So as you may know, the reason vapor products are regulated and all nicotine products are regulated is because they contain nicotine derived from tobacco. So this would change the law so that it would be nicotine derived from tobacco or any other source. And it would apply that to all tobacco products, including cigarettes. And it would make that new language or new rule definition applicable 30 days after passage. And one of the stated goals of the authors of the bill is that they're concerned that vaping companies are evading FDA's PMTA regulatory process. Now, this suggests that, yes, there have been some irresponsible actors that have gone out and just simply said, oh, we're doing this to evade the FDA's regulatory process. It's not a bright move from an optics perspective and from a regulatory perspective, but the reality is that this is one reason why this act has been introduced. Now, whether this act actually gets passed is another bigger question. And given the nature of the Congress that we have today, is slightly suspect. It'll be difficult to move any individual piece of legislation. We'll see if and when this bill gets to have a hearing, and we'll be engaging with members of Congress on this, as we did aggressively on the tax. On the tax bill, we were actively meeting and presenting the data and the policy arguments and the economic impact arguments that I showed you earlier to members of all of the relevant committees in the House and the Senate, as well as key leadership in both the House and the Senate over the course of the many months. And those meetings continue to show us the importance of continued education of the staff as well as the members of Congress on what these products that are alternative to tobacco are all about. So remember that even if this bill passed, I showed you this slide last time, there is a long road for FDA action. So even if Congress says, FDA, you have authority now to regulate synthetic nicotine, there still will need to be a rulemaking process and a regulatory process that I won't belabor right now that will take significant amount of time before any such regulation takes effect. And of course, we would be engaged in opining on that process itself. Covered a lot of territory, but before I leave, I want to suggest to you the real challenge I see for synthetic products, if you are a company that is thinking about them or you are already engaged in selling synthetic nicotine products, will be at the state level this year. I think there's a significant challenge that we'll find state by state legislation. Alabama passed a bill last year which restricted the sale of synthetic nicotine, and we're anticipating seeing bills filed to either ban the product or try to restrict the product through various other regulatory requirements this year. And these are subjects that I think companies in the space need to be thinking about and talking about. And I'm happy to talk to you and any of the participants here or that will be at the show in a couple weeks. So with that, I just offer a couple closing perspectives. I think one of the things that we need to remember is that a lot of what's happened is the FDA is creating some of its own problems here. The way in which it told stakeholders to do one thing and then decided to do something completely different with respect to flavors has created an impetus in the marketplace that forcing companies to react in ways that they would not necessarily have. Companies had invested significantly in the PMTA process. Similarly, exempting disposables from the original ban on flavored closed system devices caused the recent the significant upsurge by hanging that, we're open sign on the door, come on in. So I think that continued engagement with FDA is important, notwithstanding these recent missteps. But it is our hope that the political interference of what took place in the flavored fight recently is put to the side, and that FDA returns to focusing on science, which is where I believe the Center for Tobacco Products was, and where I believe the Office of Science at FDA was, in terms of fairly and properly and thoroughly reviewing all of the application. Instead, they were forced to make a decision or to change their course by the acting commissioner, and I think they did not like that. That is my belief. But we are where we are today. So the future of flavors is going to be very interesting, depending upon whether or not FDA returns to its science-based regulatory regime. So with that, I'm going to say thanks for the time, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you have. Can't hear you, Ben.
Always a pleasure to have you join us, Tony. It's evident that the vapor industry is an important part of the U.S. economy. $8 billion in sales, 133,000 jobs, $22 billion in economic activity. It's huge. You touched real quick on the challenge for synthetics towards the end of your presentation.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of retailers that ask us questions and reach out to us. One of the biggest questions in my mind, synthetics. Is synthetic legal or not?
Yeah. So I am a lawyer, but I'm not going to give you a legal opinion here. That being said, here's what I can tell you, right? What we do know is that there is no prohibition to selling synthetic nicotine products, right? The restrictions that exist under the Tobacco Control Act are limited to products containing nicotine that is derived from tobacco. Synthetic nicotine is not derived from tobacco. Now, recently, and so on the statute, on the law itself, it would be very difficult for FDA, and FDA knows this, because otherwise FDA would have come out and said, we regulate synthetic nicotine. But it has not said that.
Right.
What they have said is in a recent speech or discussion with the Center for Tobacco Products Director, Mitch Zeller, he did suggest that FDA may regulate or may be able to regulate synthetic nicotine as a component of a tobacco product. Now, this should tell us outright that they recognize they don't have the authority to directly regulate it. And doing so as a component of a tobacco product raises all kinds of questions that would be very legally suspect in my mind, namely to have a product that is where effectively the exception becomes the rule. In other words, when does a component of something become the thing itself? And it would be very difficult for, I think, FDA, because they would have to engage in what I would call circular reasoning in order to get there. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do things to help stem the tide of synthetic nicotine products here that are coming into the United States. They have a lot of authority on the enforcement and compliance side to go after products, for example, that are being mislabeled when they're being brought into the country.
Yep.
To go after products, for example, which don't actually contain synthetic nicotine.
Sure.
We've seen these issues come up where the product where a company claims it's using synthetic nicotine, but when you test it, it's actually tobacco-derived nicotine. Now, FDA can go and act on those folks without any further authority on synthetic nicotine. It just needs to decide to do so. It hasn't done anything yet, though.
Okay, great answer. So we have had some questions come in, which Antoine Reed's going to field to us here and see what we have on the comments board. Antoine, welcome back. How are you doing? Great presentation. You enjoy that?
I did. So we did get one question earlier in your presentation, Tony. How is salt nicotine different from TFN when it comes to the view of the FDA? Do you have any insight on that?
If I understand the question, how does salt nicotine containing a synthetic nicotine, a salt nicotine, let me see if I understand the question. A salt synthetic nicotine solution. I don't think FDA has the inclusion of salt in that question. I don't think changes the analysis at all, I guess, is the short answer. The ultimate question is the nicotine itself synthetic? Is it, and then how will can FDA regulate it? And I think I've already addressed that.
Another question that we got is, do you think any of the bigger players in the tobacco industry will ever adopt synthetic nicotine?
I think the bigger players are watching very closely. I think they're very interested in the opportunities presented by synthetic nicotine. I think you've seen such. Look at it this way, Antoine. If it wasn't for vaping products, right, and the innovation that was driven to the marketplace by vaping companies, independent of tobacco companies, right? We know how this industry grew, and it wasn't from the top down. It was from basically the bottom up. And what has happened as a result of that innovation and technology is it pushed industry forward. It pushed tobacco companies forward. So now you have companies like Philip Morris that are saying we're going to be combustion free, and that's our goal. I mean, that is a dramatic change in culture in the entire industry, right? And the opponents of the tobacco industry and all things nicotine will, kind of downplay that and disregard it. But it's real. It is a real drive because companies understand what innovation means, and they understand the future and the importance of it. I look at synthetic as simply the next type of innovation as it relates to the industry. And so being combustion free is one thing, but you want to do yourself one better. We should be looking at a synthetically formulated nicotine product that is pure and clean and devoid of all the tobacco residuals about which FDA is concerned. And the more we can achieve that suggests that, look, any company who's a forward-thinking company is going to want to be on the edge of the future and be positioned for the future. So I think there is opportunity there for those companies, and I think that they're looking at these issues as they are all issues related to the industry.
And I think another question that came in during it is, people always look at elections saying that elections matter. Those are the people who are making the decisions and pushing legislation through. So as we look towards the midterms, if the House and the Congress and everything kind of shifts in the other direction, can the vapor industry really expect any real change, or is it going to be, in your opinion, much more the same?
So I think that there will always be challenges for the vapor industry, right? The vapor industry needs to be engaged. We need to have presence in Washington, D.C., and to the greatest extent possible, presence in all of the state houses. Elections do change the dynamics, though. There's no question about that. We saw a really odd series of events which led to a Republican Trump administration announcing that they would ban all flavors, which one would sit back and think, why would a Republican anti-regulation type administration ever do something like that? Well, there was a unique set of things going on at the time. If you remember, the EVALI crisis was on the front pages every day. People were blaming nicotine products for causing lung illnesses and deaths, even though the science demonstrated that these products were not involved in those cases. So outside of those unique circumstances, though, generally you have administrations that have differing views on regulation, and I think that and differing approaches. So they do matter. So I'm anticipating a swing back in both the House and the Senate. So what does that mean? I think that means that it is easier for us to get our messages through. It is more difficult for individuals or members of Congress who want to push these regulatory agendas because they're driven by political interests. And by political interests, I mean the special interest groups that are on the, I sometimes put the public health in quotes in these cases, because we know that these are very activist groups now, like Truth Initiative, Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. They really have no regard for the truth anymore as it relates to science, because they disregard science altogether. And that's one of the things that is so significant, and why we spent a lot of time making sure that members of Congress had that letter that I mentioned earlier. It was a letter that was written by the 15 past presidents for the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, because they said, you guys are cherry picking the science and you're getting it wrong. We have to get the science and the policies on vaping right, because we have so many people that we can help in this country, particularly people in distressed communities and in underserved communities. And these are themes that members, for example, of the Democratic Party should embrace on virtually all things other than vaping and tobacco and nicotine. Yeah. And so I think we do see, I directly, I would say, when we see a swing back in the fall in the House and the Senate, I think that's going to be of a benefit in terms of our ability to communicate and help stop or stem the tide of really thoughtless bills for moving forward, kind of like this tax bill. We did a lot of work. It took a lot of work because there were a lot of powerful Democrats behind that at first, but ultimately the industry as a whole did enough work to get the vape tax stripped out of the bill.
Tony, just real quick, you covered, and we've just got a few minutes left here.
Yep.
You covered tax and tobacco in your presentation.
Yeah.
Let's talk briefly, just real quick. I had a question on the reconciliation bill for a moment. What happens if this bill is passed? Would this lead to a net price increase on vapor products for retailers? And also those 133,000 jobs, what does that do? Does that impact the reduction of jobs in the U.S. as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So if the reconciliation bill is passed and they reinsert the vaping tax, that's the worst case scenario. Right now, the vaping tax has been taken out. The House passed the bill. It went over to the Senate. The Senate has amended it, and that's where we were able to get the tax stripped out of the bill. But you're right. That bill will continue to move forward until the end of, I believe, September. That's the deadline for moving that particular piece of legislation. And it could be, the vape tax could be reintroduced into the bill. I don't think that's likely, but we're going to keep a watchful eye on it. If it does, though, yeah, the jobs, our economic impact analysis said that all in all, of those 133,000 jobs, this tax alone would knock out over 42,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
One last thing, and appreciate that, flavors, just real quick before we wrap up. Where's it all going with respect to flavors, Tony?
So this is, the $64,000 question, and probably a lot larger than that for most companies. The fact of the matter is that we need to really figure out where FDA is going to come down ultimately on flavored ends products. If the FDA says all flavored ends products need to be out of the marketplace, I don't think there's much hope for flavored combustible products. Yeah. Flavored combustible products just have really the worst arguments by comparison. And if FDA and its scientists are not convinced that flavored e-cigarettes should be available for the public, I don't see any rational way for them to conclude that menthol cigarettes should remain or that flavored cigars should remain. Now, that said, FDA has done some strange things in the past, and they still haven't issued those notices of proposed rulemaking that they said was going to be one of their highest priorities last April, right? So here we're coming up on a year, and we're still waiting to see if they issue. Now, that may be one thing, Ben, that on his way out before he retires, that Director Zeller decides he wants to move forward, right? These were priorities that were made with him at the helm. And so he may decide, you know what, I'm going to at least get those rules out. They won't be decided upon, obviously, until after he leaves, but that could be what we're looking at. So keep an eye out in the next few months to see if FDA does act. I still have a sense that there's not going to be a lot of action here for some time, though, given what's happened.
Well, that's a good point. I think what it would be good for us is maybe a follow-up here in a few months. We can get back on and give our audience an update on what's going on. Tony, last question for you is, how can people get involved with your organization and what you're doing? Are you going to be at TPE show here in a couple of weeks?
Yes, I will be. And I'm actually really looking forward to it. It was a great show last year. And I think that I'm hopeful that even despite all these issues going on in the country, that there'll be even more people attending this year. And I'm happy to talk to anybody if anybody wants to reach out to talk about these issues, anything I've mentioned today, anything that they're concerned about their business. where things are going and what needs to be done. I'd love to have the opportunity to talk and share those thoughts. As it relates to the association, getting involved with the Vapor Technology Association is easy. You can go to our website at vaportechnology.org, and there's some easy ways to sign up there. But always reaching out, that's the best and most efficient.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Antoine, have we got any other comments or questions before we sign off?
No, we just want to remind people that if they have not yet registered for TPE 2022, which happens in a couple weeks, they can do so today at tobaccoplusexpo.com. And we have more sessions. We have another session happening today for those who are watching live. It starts at 2:00 with the Cigar Association of America. We'll be talking about the cigar side of the tobacco industry and the vape. So even more good information for people. And you can go to tobaccoplusexpo.com. There's a TPE Ignite page where you can watch the past presentations, and you'll be able to see all the presentations that are happening this week. You can also see them on tobaccobusiness.com.
Tony, thanks again for everything today. As always, great presentation. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
See you later.
Bye-bye.